Okay, let's dive deep into a reality that has become, well, not just concerning, but undeniably present in our lives.
Hmm.
The source material we're unpacking today confronts us with a difficult truth. Violence isn't some distant problem anymore, not just headlines about faraway places.
No, it's much closer to home now.
It can erupt swiftly and brutally in the most unexpected and seemingly safest environments.
Right.
Think about it. Churches, schools, shopping malls, even just the street you walk down every day.
Yeah, everyday places.
And the core premise that our source lays bare, the challenging idea it asks us to grapple with, is this. In a world where this kind of unpredictable violence is a reality, while the responsibility for your immediate safety might be something you cannot, perhaps should not, completely outsource.
It's a stark opening, definitely. But the source grounds this challenging perspective in some absolutely crucial data. This isn't just, theoretical
No,
concern.
it's based on facts.
It's exactly. Our deep dive today is built specifically on findings from a key document. The United States Secret Service's National Threat Assessment Center, NTTC.
NTC, right?
Their Mass Attacks in Public Spaces 2019 report provides the factual backbone. It lays out the raw statistics, the patterns of these events,
Okay.
and alongside that, we have analysis from an article titled, Why Responsible Citizens Must Prepare for Armed Self-Defense.
Okay, so combining official data with a specific viewpoint.
Precisely. This article takes that NTT data and interprets it through a very specific lens, the perspective of self-defense training and preparedness.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to explore the uncomfortable but necessary territory presented by these sources.
Mm.
We're going to unpack the chilling realities highlighted in that NTT report, looking at the documented frequency, the specific locations where these attacks are actually happening.
Yeah, the where is crucial.
And the methods used, all as filtered and emphasized by our source article. And then we're going to dive deep into the argument that the article builds based on this data.
The why prepare argument.
Yes. Why comprehensive, reality-based preparedness? And yes, it explicitly makes the case for including firearms training is framed, from this perspective, as not just an option, but an essential component of modern personal safety. For citizens who take responsibility seriously,
Right.
this isn't about, generating fear. It's about understanding documented threats and exploring the practical, immediate implications for your safety, your family's safety, right where you live.
It really shifts the focus. It moves away from abstract policy debates maybe towards the concrete reality of what happens when violence erupts in public.
And what your role as an individual might be in that critical moment, according to the source anyway.
Exactly. As argued by the source,
Yeah.
it forces you to confront that possibility.
It certainly does. So let's jump right into the first part of our deep dive. Let's establish the landscape of these mass attacks, drawing heavily from the Intercac report's findings as they're presented and analyzed in our source material.
Okay, so the Intact report gives us a snapshot. It focuses on mass attacks in public spaces across the U.S. just for a single year, 2019.
1 year. What did they find?
They analyzed 34 such incidents. These were spread across 21 different states, so geographically widespread.
34 attacks in 1 year. And the human cost.
The numbers associated with these attacks,
Yeah.
they're incredibly sobering. The report documented 108 fatalities in that year alone
108 people killed.
and 178 injuries.
Wow. And I think it's important, as the source highlights, to remember these aren't just abstract statistics, are they?
Absolutely not.
108 fatalities means 108 lives tragically cut short. 178 injuries. That's 178 individuals whose lives were irrevocably changed physically, psychologically.
Real people, real families, real communities impacted just in those 12 months.
It underscores the sheer human toll, the scale of this issue.
Precisely. And one of the most significant takeaways the source draws from the NTAC report is where these attacks are happening.
Okay, the locations.
Yes. The report really challenges the traditional notion, maybe the comfortable notion, that mass violence is confined to certain, high-risk locations.
It's not just happening in specific danger zones.
The data shows these attacks are occurring in environments that we generally consider safe, mundane, everyday places.
Everyday places, like where specifically? Can you give some examples from the report?
Sure. The report, as highlighted by the source, details attacks in places like houses of worship, think churches, synagogues, mosques.
Places of sanctuary.
Exactly. Sanctuaries where people gather for community, solace, peace. They happen in supermarkets where you're just picking up groceries for the week.
Right. Completely normal activity.
In workplaces,
Yeah.
where you spend a huge chunk of your day. And residential complexes even.
Residential complexes. Like apartment buildings.
Yes. And the source makes specific mention of an attack that even took place on a school bus.
A school bus. That detail alone just forces you to pause, doesn't it?
It really does.
We inherently associate places like churches, grocery stores, school buses with safety, with routine, community. They are the opposite of what we might picture as a high-risk zone.
And that's the core significance the source emphasizes. The fact that mass attacks are documented in these locations, places where we typically let our guard down, where we feel we should be secure. It represents a fundamental violation of our perceived safety.
It shatters that feeling of security.
It does. It means the potential threat, as this source presents it, isn't relegated to late-night events or specific venues associated with higher risk. It's potentially integrated into the very rhythm of our daily lives.
Happening during the day.
Yes, happening during daylight hours, in places where families gather and routines unfold.
It certainly paints a picture of, well, widespread vulnerability. Okay, so we've covered where they're happening, challenging our assumptions about safe spaces. Let's talk about how. How are these attacks being carried out based on the NTIC data the source focuses on?
The report's data on methods is pretty clear and consistent. 71% of these mass attacks involved the use of firearms.
71%, the vast majority.
Yes. And the source adds a critical detail here, one that sometimes gets lost in broader debates. It points out that, according to the report's findings, many of the attackers who use firearms possess these weapons illegally.
Illegally. So even with existing regulations around acquiring weapons, many of the perpetrators in these specific incidents weren't following those regulations anyway.
That's the point the source highlights based on this data. It suggests that for these specific attacks documented in the report, focusing solely on how a weapon is legally acquired might not have prevented the incident.
Because the means were often obtained outside those legal channels.
Exactly. The weapons were then brought into public spaces and used with, obviously, devastating effect.
That's a fascinating and sobering insight straight from the report's details.
Yeah.
What about the timing? Does the report indicate any patterns there beyond just daylight hours?
Well, the timing really reinforces that everyday life aspect we discussed.
Yay.
Over half of these attacks occurred in broad daylight, specifically between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m.
Ink hour.
Peak community activity.
Yeah.
Again, this isn't something typically happening under the cover of darkness. It's happening when people are at work, school, shopping, or just out and about during the day.
And the speed. The source emphasizes the terrifying speed at which these events unfold. That seems critical.
This is perhaps the most critical, practical detail from the report, according to the source. The data reveals that some of these attacks were incredibly short-lived, over in less than 5 minutes.
Less than 5 minutes. It's hard to even process that.
Think about that. Within that incredibly compressed time frame, the report documents double-digit casualty counts.
So huge damage in just minutes.
In the space of just a few minutes, a single individual with a weapon was able to inflict significant death and injury on a large number of people.
And that kind of speed, as the source shrilly points out, has massive implications for any external response, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That rapid nature is a defining characteristic. It severely limits the time available for anyone not immediately on the scene to respond effectively.
So it's not like a prolonged siege most of the time.
No. The source describes these attacks not as complex military-style operations, but as they are presented in the report. Close quarters, rapid and often indiscriminate acts of violence.
Close quarters, rapid, indiscriminate.
And to bring it home, the source uses vivid, relatable examples to illustrate this. It talks about these incidents happening in the line at your favorite coffee shop or walking your child home from school.
Wow. That language is clearly chosen to underline just how proximate and sudden this potential threat is to your own reality.
It strips away any sense of distance or abstractness from the danger, doesn't it?
It really does. So we've used the NTIC data via the source's lens to establish the what, where, and how of these attacks. That naturally leads us to the who. Who are the individuals perpetrating these events? Let's move into part 2 and dive into the attacker profiles based on the report's findings.
Yes, the NTAC report goes beyond simply chronicling the attacks. It delves into the histories and behaviors of the individuals who carried them out.
Trying to understand the why behind the what.
Exactly. This is framed as moving from understanding the event itself to dissecting the underlying factors that potentially contributed to these tragedies.
What are some of the key characteristics that the report highlights about these attackers, as presented by the source? What patterns emerge?
A few patterns stand out from the data. First, a significant percentage had prior criminal histories.
Criminal records. How many?
The report found that 51% of the attackers had previous criminal records.
Over half.
Yes. And the source zooms in on a particular aspect of this, noting that a significant number of these records included violent offenses. Things like domestic assault are mentioned.
So for over half of these attackers, there was already a documented history of criminal behavior, and often specifically violent behavior, not just petty crime.
That's precisely the pattern the source highlights from the report's findings. It suggests that violence wasn't necessarily a sudden, unprecedented act for these individuals.
More like a continuation or escalation.
Right. It was often a continuation or even an escalation of previous violent tendencies already present in their history. This wasn't typically coming from someone with a completely clean slate.
That's a critical insight. What else did the report reveal about their backgrounds or states of mind? Mental health is often discussed in this context.
Mental health is another significant factor documented in the report and emphasized by the source. The data showed that 46% of the attackers displayed signs of untreated mental illness.
Nearly half. What kind of signs?
The source lists examples from the report such as psychosis, suicidal ideations, and delusions. Serious conditions.
And the source is careful to point out the untreated aspect, isn't it? That seems important.
Yes, that nuance is specifically drawn out. The statistic itself, 46% showing signs of untreated mental illness, points, as the source interprets it, to potential gaps in mental health intervention systems.
Right.
The implication isn't a broad statement about all individuals with mental health conditions, of course,
No, definitely not.
but rather that untreated issues, as found in nearly half of these specific attackers, can be a contributing risk factor if left unaddressed. The source reports this data point from the NTCAC report without offering further commentary or taking a stance on mental health policy itself.
Just highlighting the report's finding in relation to these specific attackers.
Exactly, just reporting the data.
Okay, that's an important distinction to maintain. Were there any other demographic patterns noted, perhaps regarding age?
Yes. The report also highlighted an interesting and frankly concerning demographic trend. 30% of the attackers were under the age of 25.
30% under 25.
The source specifically describes this as a sharp rise in the involvement of adolescents and young adults in these types of mass attacks compared to previous patterns.
A sharp rise in younger individuals carrying out these attacks, that feels significant. Does the source speculate on the reasons for this or its implications?
The source notes the trend itself as documented by the report. It suggests it might indicate changing dynamics, maybe in who is susceptible to becoming an attacker, or perhaps influences on their targeting or methods.
But no deep dive into the why from the source.
No, it doesn't delve into a deep analysis of why this particular age group is showing a sharp rise. It simply presents the report's finding as a notable development in the profile of attackers in 2019.
Okay. And perhaps one of the most significant and honestly most frustrating findings highlighted by the source from the NTCAC report is about warning signs.
Absolutely. This finding is pivotal to the source's overall argument for preparedness. The report found that a substantial majority, 65% of these attackers, had previously made threats or displayed other concerning warning signs before they carried out their attacks.
65%. Nearly two-thirds. So in the majority of these cases, the individuals were signaling their intent or distress in some observable way before the violence occurred.
According to the NTAC data cited by the source, yes, the signs were often there, potentially visible to friends, family, colleagues, maybe even authorities.
So people around them might have seen something was wrong.
Possibly. And this is where the source draws a particularly pointed conclusion from the report's findings. Yet, intervention often failed.
Intervention failed.
This is framed as a critical failure point in existing systems. It implies that while mechanisms might exist to identify individuals posing a risk, the ability to effectively intervene, to actually prevent the attack from happening, is frequently falling short.
The signs are there,
But they're either not recognized, maybe not reported, or perhaps not acted upon effectively or in time.
that failure of intervention based on visible warning signs feels like a profound systemic issue that the report is flagging.
It certainly does. And it's this convergence of factors highlighted by the report, individuals with known risks, maybe a history of violent behavior, showing observable warning signs, and ultimately having access to the means.
Even, as you noted, illegally obtained means sometimes.
Right. It's this convergence that forms the basis for the source article's argument here for citizen preparedness.
Okay, so the attacker profiles and the failure points identified in the report are directly linked by the source to the call for individual readiness.
Exactly. The source explicitly connects these findings to the inherent limitations faced by official responders, like law enforcement.
What limitations does it point to?
It states candidly that law enforcement agencies operate under legal, political, and staffing constraints, practical realities.
Sure.
These constraints, the source argues, mean that law enforcement simply cannot be everywhere at once.
It's physically impossible.
Right. This limitation creates the fundamental rationale, from the source's perspective, for why individual citizen preparedness becomes, in their view, a necessary component of safety in this new reality.
Because if professional help cannot be instantly present at the onset of an attack.
Who is? The people already there.
And that question leads us perfectly into part 3, the critical seconds. Understanding the reality of response time in these situations. This feels like the crux of the practical argument.
Yes, this section of the source cuts right to the practical implications of the report's findings. It discusses, with a focus on practicality rather than criticism, the inherent delay in professional response. The source states directly that even the best police departments have a response delay.
And why does that delay exist? It's not about lack of will or incompetence, right? It's logistical.
Not at all. It's presented as a statement of practical reality. It's logistics. Response time is impacted by distance. How far away are the officers from the scene when the call comes in?
Makes sense.
It's impacted by communication, the time it takes for the 911 call,
Yeah.
the dispatch, getting the information relayed accurately, and mobilization, the time it takes for officers to gear up, get into their vehicles, navigate traffic, and actually travel to the location.
So many steps involved.
Yes. Regardless of training or dedication, there is an unavoidable time lag between the moment an attack begins and the moment professional help can realistically arrive on scene and begin to effectively act.
And the source uses a specific, deeply unsettling example from 2019 to illustrate just how devastatingly critical those initial seconds or minutes can be.
It does. The example is the mass shooting in Dayton, Ohio on August 4, 2019.
I remember that. Horrific.
Yes. The source lays out the facts from reporting at the time. 9 people were killed and 20 injured. And the horrifying timeline. The entire attack, from the first shot to the attacker being neutralized, took just 32 seconds.
32 seconds. That's barely enough time to even comprehend what's happening, let alone for someone across town to respond.
Exactly. Less than a minute. And the source notes that law enforcement did respond quickly in Dayton, citing the available reports. They engaged quickly, it says. They were nearby.
So, a fast police response in this case.
Yes. But even with that quick professional response, the critical damage was already done. The source emphasizes, quote, multiple lives were lost before they could act.
Before the police could even effectively intervene.
Right. This example is used to drive home the stark reality. The initial, most lethal phase of these rapid mass attacks often happens within a time frame, seconds or perhaps a minute or two, that is frequently over before trained, equipped external responders can physically get to the scene and intervene.
It makes the point undeniable. The initial wave of casualties occurs during that immediate on-site window, before help arrives.
Yes, the immediate lethality is contained within that first brief phase, and the source doesn't leave it there. It contrasts the outcome in Dayton with examples where someone was present and, according to the source, prepared to act immediately.
This is where the White Settlement, Texas church shooting from December 29, 2019 comes into the picture, right?
Precisely. The source highlights this incident as a key example where armed citizens or security personnel intervened. This wasn't a situation where the response came only from external law enforcement arriving later.
It was an internal, immediate response.
Yeah.
And how did that immediate on-site intervention impact the outcome, according to the source's account?
The outcome, as presented by the source, was dramatically different from Dayton. The threat, the attacker, was neutralized in seconds.
In seconds.
And the source provides a specific detail that is quite powerful. A single, well-trained civilian stopped a mass killing with one accurate shot.
One shot by a civilian stopped it in seconds. And the context of that event is important too, isn't it? Where did it happen?
Absolutely. The source notes that this happened in a church service, a room filled with unarmed parishioners.
So a very vulnerable crowd.
Exactly. This context underscores the potential vulnerability of the victims and highlights, from the source's perspective, the effectiveness of immediate skilled action by someone who was present and prepared to defend themselves and others.
And the contrast with Dayton.
The contrast with Dayton, where even a rapid professional response couldn't prevent significant casualties in those initial seconds, is starkly drawn. It's used to illustrate the source's point about the potential value of on-site readiness.
So the synthesis drawn from these examples by the source is clear. The reality of response time dictates that there is a critical window at the very beginning of an attack.
Mhm.
And during that window, the people already present are the only ones who can potentially affect the outcome before external help arrives.
That's the core message the source extracts from these events and the NTT data. The initial phase, often measured in seconds, is typically before professional responders can enter the scene.
And that's when the most damage can occur.
Yes. And this reality, the source argues, is why on-site preparedness is framed as essential.
Okay, so if the unavoidable delay in professional response means those initial seconds are critical, the source argues that some form of preparedness is necessary for individuals who might find themselves in the path of such violence. But, and this seems key, the source is quick to clarify that preparedness isn't simply about the physical tool itself. Owning a firearm isn't the finish line.
Exactly. This moves us into part 4, where the source directly addresses what it sees as a common misconception. It states quite plainly, too many Americans believe that simply owning a firearm is sufficient,
Just having it is enough.
and it pushes back hard against that idea. The reality is starkly different.
Why isn't just having a gun enough in the context of these kinds of high-stress attacks, according to the source?
The source explains the significant vulnerability that exists without training, particularly when facing the kind of extreme stress these events induce.
The stress factor.
Yes, it points out that under stress, without training in movement, shot placement, and threat identification, even armed civilians are vulnerable.
Stress does incredible things to your body and mind, doesn't it, physiologically? How does that impact someone trying to use a firearm defensively without specific training for that stress?
Well, stress triggers the body's fight or flight response. Adrenaline surges, which is great for, running away or maybe fighting instinctively.
But not for precision tasks.
Exactly. It's terrible for tasks requiring fine motor skills, clear thinking, and precision. Adrenaline can cause hands to shake, tunnel vision sets in, auditory exclusion where you literally can't hear clearly.
How?
And it makes complex decision-making extremely difficult. Owning a firearm is possessing a tool, but effectively and safely deploying that tool under immense pressure
In chaos.
in a chaotic, rapidly unfolding life-or-death situation against a moving threat, potentially with innocent people right next to you, that requires a completely different level of capability.
A capability that raw stress actively undermines without training.
Precisely. Training helps you manage and perform despite the stress.
So what does the source argue are the essential components of effective modern firearms training? Training specifically geared towards surviving and responding to these types of mass attacks.
The source outlines several key elements that go far beyond just basic marksmanship on a square range. First, it highlights the importance of stress-inoculation drills, simulating real-life scenarios.
Simulating the chaos and pressure, that seems absolutely critical for dealing with the stress factor you just mentioned, building resilience.
Exactly. Training under simulated pressure helps you become more familiar with your own physiological and psychological responses to stress. It's about building resilience, yes. Developing muscle memory for critical actions.
So you don't have to think as much.
Right. And practicing decision-making processes while experiencing those stress effects. It makes the brain and body less likely to freeze or fumble when it happens for real. It's building the capacity to function effectively when everything inside you is screaming otherwise.
Okay, stress inoculation. What's the next essential piece of training the source identifies?
Legal use of force education. This is presented as crucial to avoid criminal or civil liability.
The legal side. This is such a vital and maybe often overlooked part of carrying a firearm for self-defense, isn't it?
Absolutely. The source places significant emphasis on this. It's not just about the physical act of using force.
It's knowing when you legally can.
Exactly. Using lethal force, even in clear self-defense, carries enormous legal weight. Without a deep understanding of the laws governing the use of force in your specific jurisdiction when it is legally permissible, when it is not, what constitutes a legally recognized imminent threat, you could face devastating criminal charges or civil lawsuits.
Even if you believed you were doing the right thing.
Even then. The source frames this training as integral to responsible self-defense, ensuring your actions are within legal bounds.
Okay, crucial point. What about training for scenarios where using the firearm might not be the immediate option or maybe isn't possible?
Good question. The source includes close quarters defense tactics as essential. This is training for situations that might occur when disarmed or ambushed.
Given that the source describes mass attacks as often being close quarters and rapid,
Hmm,
preparing for those immediate up-close scenarios makes a lot of sense.
it does.
You might not have time or space to draw a weapon, or the initial threat could be a sudden physical assault right in front of you.
Precisely. Training needs to acknowledge the reality of the environments and the speed of these attacks. It includes skills to defend yourself, maybe create distance, when the threat is immediate and physically close.
So, preparing for scenarios where your firearm might not be accessible or isn't the first line of defense
Yes, it's about having a layered response capability, not being a one-trick pony, so to speak.
makes sense. And finally, when the firearm is used, what skill is paramount, especially in the types of crowded locations we discussed earlier, supermarkets, churches, malls?
Precision shooting under pressure. The source specifically notes its importance, especially in crowded spaces.
Precision shooting under intense stress, potentially with bystanders feet away. That highlights the incredible demand this places on the individual, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The stakes couldn't be higher. In a crowded public space, the need is not just to stop the attacker, but to do so with a level of accuracy that minimizes the risk to innocent people.
Innocent people who are likely in close proximity, maybe even moving.
Exactly. Achieving this requires extensive, realistic practice. It's about building the skill needed to place shots accurately while dealing with the physiological effects of stress, potential movement of both the target and bystanders, and the presence of non-threats. It's incredibly demanding.
The source is quite explicit then about the type of training it believes is necessary for civilians in this context, not just any training.
Yes, it strongly advocates for what it calls high liability, reality-based firearms training,
High liability.
meaning training that simulates situations where the potential consequences of error are immense life and death, legal jeopardy. And reality-based means moving beyond traditional static target shooting at a range.
So not just standing still shooting at paper.
Right. It involves training in environments that mimic real-world locations, incorporating movement, using cover and concealment, dealing with simulated bystander presence, running scenarios that require split-second decision-making under pressure. It's about training for the chaos, not just the mechanics of shooting.
And it makes a very strong statement about the standard of training it believes civilians should seek out, comparing it to professionals.
It does. It argues that civilians seeking to be prepared should pursue training standards similar to those for law enforcement and executive protection personnel.
Why that high standard?
The rationale, as stated by the source, is direct. Violence doesn't distinguish between uniforms and civilians.
The threat is the same.
The nature of the threat in a mass attack, the speed, the need for precision under stress. These demands are similar, whether you are a police officer responding or a citizen caught in the event. Therefore, the source argues, the training standard necessary for effective and responsible response should be similarly high.
That argument for a high reality-based standard of training really elevates the discussion beyond simple ownership, doesn't it? It frames it as a serious skill development process.
It absolutely does.
So, having made the case for what kind of training is needed based on the reality of attacks and response times, the source then places this trained citizen within the broader picture of community safety. This brings us to part 5. The citizen as the first line of defense.
Yes, it circles back to the NTIQ report's overarching conclusion, which the source highlights again. These tragedies are preventable if the appropriate community systems are in place.
Okay, appropriate community systems. How does the source interpret that?
The source interprets this not just as a call for government action or institutional fixes, but for a multifaceted approach where different components of the community play distinct vital roles in prevention and response.
And the source defines those roles by articulating different lines of defense. Is that right?
Yes, it creates a clear hierarchy, or maybe a sequence, based on response time and proximity to the actual threat when it emerges. It identifies what it terms the second line of defense.
And who does the source place in that second line? The professionals.
This is where the trained professionals and established systems sit. Threat assessment teams, mental health professionals, and law enforcement.
Okay.
The source fully acknowledges their critical role, both in trying to identify potential threats before they act, and obviously in responding once an incident is underway. These are essential components of any comprehensive safety strategy.
They are absolutely vital, no question, but the source argues they are the second line.
Correct. Based on the reality of response time and the speed of mass attacks discussed earlier, the Dayton example, the 32 seconds, The source presents a definitive statement on the first line.
And that is,
They are the second line of defense. The first line is you.
the first line is you. That's a powerful statement. And for some, perhaps unsettling. It places the immediate responsibility squarely on the individual present when the violence begins.
It does. It reflects the source's perspective, driven by the stark timelines of events like Dayton. The individual already on the scene is, by default, the person in the immediate position to potentially mitigate casualties during that critical initial window,
Before professional help can possibly arrive.
before they can arrive and intervene effectively.
Yeah.
It's a perspective that shifts the locus of initial response from external authorities to the individual citizen caught in the event.
So if the citizen is framed as this first line, what specific actions or investments does the source urge citizens to make to fulfill that role effectively and responsibly?
It lists the key areas where the source believes responsible citizens must invest time, effort, and resources to be truly prepared. Professional firearms training is listed again naturally.
Reinforcing its foundational importance.
Yes, reinforcing everything discussed earlier, linking back to skill under stress, precision, decision-making. It's presented as non-negotiable for armed preparedness.
Right. It's not just listed as owning a tool, but mastering a skill set requiring professional development. What else?
It also includes mental preparedness under stress.
Ah, the psychological side again.
Yes, this goes back to the idea of stress inoculation, building resilience, and the ability to make sound decisions in a chaotic, high-pressure environment. Preparedness isn't purely physical, it's significantly mental fortitude and readiness to act appropriately under extreme duress.
And a very practical consideration for anyone choosing to be armed must be storage, right?
Absolutely. The source includes responsible firearm storage and access.
That sounds like a balance.
It is. The source emphasizes that a firearm must be stored securely to prevent unauthorized access, particularly by children or individuals who might misuse it.
Yeah.
But it also needs to remain accessible to the responsible owner in a timely manner should a genuine threat emerge. It's that critical balance between safety and readiness.
And reinforcing the point about legality we discussed earlier, that seems to be a recurring theme.
It is legal knowledge to guide your defensive actions. The source repeatedly comes back to this. It underlines that being prepared is not just about having the physical capability and the mental readiness.
But also knowing the rules.
Yes, possessing a clear understanding of the law to ensure any defensive actions taken are lawful, justifiable, and responsible within the specific legal framework you're operating in.
So by investing in these specific areas, the training, the mental prep, responsible storage, and legal knowledge, the source argues that citizens then contribute significantly to creating those appropriate community systems the anti-C report mentioned. They become part of the solution.
They transition, in the source's view, from being potential victims, or perhaps even liabilities in a crisis, to being potential assets.
How so? A liability.
Well, an untrained individual, even if armed, might hesitate, act improperly, miss shots endangering others, or generally exacerbate the danger or be unable to act effectively under stress.
Whereas a trained individual.
A trained individual, according to the source's argument, is equipped with the skills and knowledge to potentially intervene effectively and responsibly, minimizing further harm.
And that leads directly to the source's powerful concluding contrast for this section, summarizing that point.
It states it unequivocally. Being armed without training is a liability.
Full stop.
A danger, potentially.
Potentially. Then it says, being trained and armed makes you an asset to your family and community.
An asset versus a liability. That transformation from someone potentially dangerous or ineffective under stress to someone capable of acting responsibly and effectively to protect life, that seems to be the core argument for comprehensive training that the source makes. Exactly. It's about the capacity to be a protector, but grounded in skill, knowledge, legal understanding, and readiness, not just ownership of the tool.
It shifts the focus from the simple presence of a tool to the human capability behind it, the skill, the judgment, the legal and ethical understanding required to use that tool lawfully, effectively, and responsibly in the most extreme circumstances.
Yes, it emphasizes the whole package.
Okay, that brings us towards the conclusion of our deep dive into this specific source material. We've navigated the challenging landscape of mass attacks as presented through the NTEC report data, understanding where and how they happen, their terrifying speed, and the human toll.
Covering the what, where, and how.
We've looked at the profiles of the attackers, the patterns of criminal history, the presence of untreated mental illness, that sharp rise in younger perpetrators, and critically, the prevalence of warning signs and the documented failure of intervention in many cases.
dissecting the who and the systemic issues highlighted.
We've examined the undeniable reality of response time, starkly illustrated by contrasting the outcomes in events like the Dayton and White settlement shootings, the critical seconds.
Underlining the when matters most right at the beginning.
We've delved deep into the source's argument that effective preparedness in this environment demands far more than simple firearm ownership, detailing the crucial components of high liability, reality-based training.
Focusing on the necessary skills and knowledge beyond just having the tool.
And finally, we've explored the source's perspective that, given all these realities, the responsible, trained citizen is framed as the essential first line of defense in those critical initial seconds.
Positioning the prepared individual within the broader safety ecosystem, as argued by the source. It's been a comprehensive look at a difficult subject, synthesizing documented data with a specific interpretation of the implications for individual responsibility and preparedness.
And the source leaves us with a final thought that really encapsulates its entire message. It serves as a stark summary of its perspective, doesn't it?
Yes, the final thought is presented quite directly. The world has changed.
Starts with that premise.
The question is no longer if violence might come to your doorstep, it's when.
That's a bold statement, shifting from possibility to probability, in their view.
It certainly is. Then it continues, training is not paranoia, it's preparation.
Okay, reframing training.
It's not about living in fear, it's about living responsibly.
The world has changed. The question is no longer if, it's when. That's a powerful shift in framing presented by the source. And then linking, training is not paranoia, it's preparation. And it's not about living in fear, it's about living responsibly. This perspective really reframes the whole idea of preparedness, doesn't it? It's not presented as dwelling on fear or being consumed by anxiety about potential threats.
No, it positions it differently.
Instead, it's framed as a proactive, logical response, a responsible approach to a potential reality. A reality that, based on the data and examples discussed from the source, is no longer a distant theoretical possibility, but something documented as occurring in everyday places.
Right. It shifts the focus from an emotional reaction, perhaps fear, to a practical, actionable mindset. Moving from dwelling on the problem to emphasizing what the source sees as a potential part of the solution.
Framed as a matter of personal responsibility in a world where the data shows these events are occurring with, well, disturbing frequency in unexpected places.
Exactly.
And the very last sentence of the source provides a final, thought-provoking challenge for the listener, pulling together the essence of its argument about what prepared truly means.
It concludes by saying, arm yourself not just with a weapon, but with the knowledge and skill to use it lawfully, ethically, and effectively.
Lawfully, ethically, and effectively. Those three words, together, unpack so much of what we've discussed based on the source's perspective.
They really do.
Yeah.
Each word carries weight.
Think about what lawfully demands a deep understanding of complex, specific legal statutes before you're ever in a crisis, not learning it afterwards.
Proactive knowledge.
What about ethically? What moral and ethical considerations must guide your actions in a life-or-death scenario, potentially involving split-second decisions with irreversible consequences?
Huge implications there, beyond just the law.
And effectively, what level of skill is truly required to neutralize a threat under unimaginable stress in a crowded, chaotic space without causing unintended harm to innocent bystanders?
It points back to that high standard of training discussed earlier.
Exactly. This isn't just about capability. It's about immense personal responsibility and discipline that goes far beyond simply owning a tool. It leaves you, the listener, pondering. What does arming yourself truly mean in the context of being able to act lawfully, ethically, and effectively?
What level of commitment in time, training, and mental preparation does that actually require from you? It challenges you to reflect on the full scope of responsibility that, according to the source, accompanies the capability being discussed.
That intersection of legal constraints, ethical considerations, and the very real demands of effectiveness and skill in a crisis, all framed within the source's argument for the responsible, prepared citizen as the first line of defense. Something to think about.